What would motivate Tehran now to strike Israel directly?
I think we need to be very careful about those kinds of judgments. They do, and in many ways should, reflect rational thinking about the long term. What we have seen, however, is that each side is motivated by a preoccupation with deterrence. And deterrence requires credibility, and credibility, unfortunately, most often demands action. The president in the United States is working very hard, in my view, to do whatever he can to deter action as the next step because of the consequences both to world economies, to world stabilities, and to deep uncertainty. And a third major military preoccupation by the United States is not something that we should anticipate with any kind of enthusiasm. And that's what we're staring in the face. And its capacity to be disruptive in the region is real. And disruption in the region, despite the more optimistic, rational conclusions about oil pricing and oil availability, is in itself a significant uncertainty. I lived through some of the periods back in the 1970s when, in fact, we bet on the fact that oil prices would remain stable, and they didn't. So we know something of that experience, and we need to be careful.
Well, Ambassador, we have heard the phrase regional war brought up a few times today, knowing that nothing yet has happened, and it is possible that Iran could select a de-escalatory option here. But when we use a term like regional war, what exactly are we talking about? Is this the idea that there could actually be a hot war between Israel and Iran, or would other nations in Iran, would other nation states be involved? Would U.S. troops physically be on the ground? What exactly do we mean here when we're looking at possible future scenarios?
One is limited here by being careful, and by being careful, one wants to anticipate the most difficult consequences, not the easiest ones. And the most difficult consequences are that in the course of military action, each side moves against the other in hopes that it will deter further action, but rather, in fact, causes the increase in clashes as each side feels that it has an obligation to its polity, to its people, and to its economy to do everything possible in the field of military action to stave off the next steps. But in moving in that direction, somehow increases the propensity for that happening. And it's that sort of out of control cascading problem that we are always worried about in terms of the use of military force, and we should be.
You mentioned the 70s, Ambassador. I know you worked for President Carter in the early part of your career. We keep hearing from analysts that this is the most dangerous time that we have seen in the Middle East since then. Some have suggested that it is more dangerous. What do you think?
I think it is dangerous, and I hesitate to enter into a kind of race of predictions that are dire in terms of their impact and effect. What I hope I have said is that things are serious enough for us to be very concerned. And so far, I think the United States is doing what it can to assure that both sides recognize that there is, in what I would call here, no free run of the use of military force without very dangerous consequences, and that the United States does remain tied to its alliance with Israel and its protection of Israel, despite the fact that we were ourselves the victim of an attack on our embassy building in Tehran back many years ago.
Well, sir, you talk about the alliance between the U.S. and Israel, and certainly the language we heard from President Biden today saying that the U.S. will be by Israel's side, essentially, to paraphrase his words. It comes against a backdrop, though, of the administration being more critical of Israel in regard to its policy in Gaza. Given some of the public tension we have seen between the Israeli government and the Biden administration, how does that factor into this moment and potentially Iran's thinking as it considers what it might do this weekend?
I think that given the trend and the deep concern in the United States and what I think is the growing popular, put it this way, discouragement at what is going on in Gaza, it should be taken by Iran as an unusual step on the part of the Biden administration, not something that is kind of the reaction of push-button automaticity.